I'm Logan Crawford, and right now on GBN TV, we're delving into the critical issue of racial inequality with Steve Brigham, author of It's Never Been a Level Playing Field, Overcoming 8 Racial Myths to Even the Field. In this eye-opening book, Steve dissects deeply ingrained myths that perpetuate racial disparities in America, from housing and education to the justice system. With personal insight and decades of public engagement, Steve offers readers a roadmap for dismantling systemic racism and creating a more equitable future. We're delighted to have this very talented author join us here today on Global Book Network. We thank the team at Atticus Publishing for helping us put him in the Global Book Network today. And we ask viewers like you to support authors like him by subscribing to our channel and by purchasing his amazing book. The links are below this interview. Steve, great to see you here today on Global Book Network.
Thanks, Logan. It's so great to be here.
Great to have you on the show. Let me hit you with the question that a lot of critics might hit you with. And that is, we've had Barack Obama as president. We have Kamala Harris running as president now. Who says the playing field isn't level anymore? What do you say?
Well, so, the myth back in 2008, after Barack Obama was elected, was, oh, we're now in a post-racial society and nothing could be further from the truth. If you look at what's going on still in America today, we have inequities in education, in our economic system, in our health systems, in our justice systems. So a lot more African Americans have been able to be successful over the last 60 or 70 years. But it's still not the norm in the way it's the norm for white people.
Exactly. There are some standouts, in Hollywood, on the political scene, but a lot of people could even argue it's still tokenism because that is not the norm, as you mentioned. Why do you think it is? Why do you think we're still at this point in our society where African Americans and Black Americans have not reached the level of achievement in some cases, prosperity in other cases, recognition in still other cases? Is it because of our deeply ingrained racism that dates back to the inception of our country?
I mean, it really does, Logan. In the 1960s, when we had the Civil Rights Acts of 64, 65, and 68, which were supposed to really begin leveling the playing field, we didn't change enough at that point. It was a time of great, dissension in America. If you can remember, in the mid to late 60s, there were a lot of racial uprisings that were happening in Black neighborhoods, countering police brutality, countering the lack of jobs and the prolific economic discrimination. And we really didn't change systems. We passed some laws. We hoped for better, but in a lot of ways, the situation didn't change. So even today, we see major gaps in terms of household income for whites as opposed to Blacks. The same 10-to-1 ratio of white wealth to Black wealth. We see public schools as almost as segregated in the 2020s as they were in the 1960s. So we had a chance then. We didn't really change systems. We tweaked and adjusted systems. And quite honestly, and this may be uncomfortable to some listeners, there's been a lot of white resistance and pushback ever since the 60s to any semblance of Black progress in so many different arenas.
Yeah. What do you say that a lot of it is linked to poverty? I mean, especially when you look at the criminal justice system, a lot of that is linked to the fact that, people who are accused of crimes can't afford attorneys like people of means can. The same thing's true in neighborhoods. You have an expensive neighborhood, you've got great schools. You've got a poor neighborhood, you've got lousy schools often. So a lot of it has to do with the income barrier between white people and Black people, don't you think?
There's no doubt poverty plays a role. I think we need to understand how poverty in Black communities really was perpetuated over the decades, right? So going back to the 1920s and 1930s, we restricted Blacks in terms of being able to live in wealthier neighborhoods. We redlined in our cities so that banks no longer would provide any kind of financial lending for blacks to own their own houses. We restricted where blacks could live by creating the black ghetto. And those black ghettos from the 20s all the way up till today um, are places of high poverty.
Yeah.
And too many African Americans are still stuck in places like that. A lot more have moved out to the suburbs, thankfully. But if you look, for example, just where nearly 50% of African American kids still attend high poverty schools, only 6% of whites do. So there's no doubt that it's tied to poverty and lower incomes, but there's systemic factors in play there that have made that happen in the first place and perpetuated it ever since.
Uh, I find it ironic that you have very high income areas, neighborhoods, communities that are largely segregated, predominantly white in many cases, very affluent. There are Harris wall signs on all of their lawns, and good luck trying to build affordable housing in that community or low income housing in that community, or changing zoning laws so people can have rentals on their property or within their property. So a lot of it is preaching that I'm for equity and I'm for change.
Not in my
You're not doing it.
backyard. Right.
Yeah.
No, I mean that's exactly right. And our affordable housing issue is nationwide. We have far too little housing that most Americans, or I would say probably 40% of Americans can actually afford. That's disproportionately African American, but it impacts people of every color, including white people. And it's again, it the main solution, there can be incentives from the federal government, but a lot of that change has to happen at the local level. Like you said, in terms of what we allow and don't allow, how we zone, right? Allowing multifamily apartments. I was just in Fairfax County last week where I visited a new affordable housing complex that was kind of like being in a 4 or 5 star hotel. So people's notions of what affordable housing or low income housing um, dates back to kind of the public housing complexes, a lot of which you still see where you live in New York City. That's people's image of it. And it's like, well, we don't want that. But
Yeah.
that's not how affordable housing is being built these days. And we need to change our mindset as well as change our laws.
Exactly. And you've got to do more than just lip service to the progressive cause. You have to live it, you have to advocate it. And most of the change actually does, as you mentioned, happen on the local level. Let's get into some of the 8 racial myths.
Sure.
Tell us what one of them are.
Well, so the first one I'll mention is the access to genuine justice myth.
Yeah.
So I think most Americans say, yeah, something like the murder of George Floyd happened, and there are other cases like that, but those are kind of anomalies. But in general, we all access the same, criminal justice system. Well, it's just not true. And I want to read one statistic that really I didn't know about until I started writing the book. Blacks make up 15% of the country's drug users, but they're 37% of those arrested for drug violations, 59% of those convicted, 74% of those sent to prison for a drug offense. You can't argue that whites are facing that same system because they're not, even if they are quote unquote drug offenders. So there really is a bifurcated or dual justice system, and blacks face a much more severe and kind of concentrated injustice system in a lot of cases. And again, a lot of this, as you said before, it ties to living in high poverty neighborhoods, but it's also how we decided to enact justice in a lot of those communities, starting in the 70s and 80s and the crackdowns in a way that we didn't crack down in white neighborhoods that were dealing cocaine at the same level as crack was being dealt in the cities.
Exactly. If you were to stop and frisk people in Greenwich, Connecticut, you'd probably find just as many drugs in their pockets as you do as people in New York City. The difference is the people in Greenwich, Connecticut have lawyers that'll stop you from doing that. Uh,
Right.
and
And,
so
and they'll
that's
and they'll and they'll pass laws or rules and regulations about the ability to pull people over like that. So yes, exactly.
Yeah. Let's go through one more myth. We'll save most of them for the book, but let's talk about one more.
So, I mean, I could pick any of the eight, right? I mean, so one I will say is just the overarching myth America provides an equal playing field for all. This is a conversation and argument I've had with several white friends over the years. And for me, the writing of the book allowed me to finally make more compelling and coherent arguments. If you look at leadership in just about every sector in America, whether it's private sector, public sector, nonprofit sector, philanthropic sector, whites are in positions of leadership in 85, 90, 95%, 99% in those sectors. And African Americans are a pittance in the percentage of leadership. And so just when you look at our larger economic system, our employment system, the sectors continue to be dominated in very significant ways by whites, and often white males, not often, not sometimes white females. But right there, that snapshot of what leadership looks like in the sectors across our country, it's still almost as white as it was 40 years ago.
What's the solution? I mean, that's that's the big question is how do you overcome it? You can overcome, inequalities and disparities for religion, different nuances of race, but being black and white is literally black and white. And that's the problem, I think, as I think that's why African Americans face more overt racism than perhaps Latinos or Asians, for example.
Yeah, no, so I devote the last third of my book to solutions. And basically, what I say is America has never paid any kind of restitution to African Americans after, hundreds of years of enslavement and then 100 years of Jim Crow, which, was a austere time for blacks in America. And so I say I'm a supporter of reparations, but reparations are never going to happen in my lifetime. And so, what can we do in all the areas that I talk about in the book? And so, I organize it into four different chapters. One is transforming the education landscape for African American youth. So, some examples there is that we need to fund universal birth to three, pre-K 3, and pre-K 4 programs. And that could be for all kids, but in general, African American kids do not have access to high quality childcare, pre-K 3, pre-K 4 across the country. Let's do that. Let's fund that universally. Let's create a Title I for higher education and triple Pell Grants for students of lower incomes, which disproportionately are African American. And like you said, transforming our housing and zoning laws with regards to where people can live, because we still live in a highly segregated society. Economically, issuing baby bonds to all newborns, but giving different amounts based on income level, which again, African Americans would get in general higher amounts because they are typically coming from lower income households. Everyone would get it, but African Americans would benefit more because they're coming in to receive a baby bond at birth, at receiving a higher level investment than whites. So I do that for justice too, looking at how we increase police accountability, how we stop criminalizing poverty, how we change and make reforms in sentencing and the way we prosecute a lot of different types of crimes. So it's a comprehensive set of proposals in each of the key arenas that I cover in the book. And even if we did a few of them, in some areas, they would make hopefully a transformative difference. And the more we do, the more transformation possible.
I agree. You've covered a lot here, Steve, unpacked a lot, and I think you're really on the money with a lot of it, if not all of it. And I think to make it palatable to the American voter, tie it to poverty, tie it to income. And like you said, African Americans will largely benefit from it anyway because they're the ones who are in poverty in many cases. And but I do think profound changes have to be made on the education system, the way we house people in this country, and the criminal justice system, particularly by empowering people on the educational level. it's going to help erase all of those other detriments to their development. The name of the book is It's Never Been a Level Playing Field, Overcoming 8 Racial Myths to Even the Field. It is an eye-opening book, and the author dissects deeply ingrained myths that perpetuate racial disparities in America, from housing to education to the justice system. It is a terrific book. It is an eye-opener, and it will inform you when you talk to your friends in political circles, whether you're on the right or your left. I think you'll find a lot of common ground in this book that makes a lot of sense. Steve, thank you so much for joining me here today on GBN.
Logan, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure to spend time with you.
Same here. Enjoyed speaking with you. Appreciate your insight. And to the folks at home, I'm Logan Crawford, thanking you for your time this time. Until next time.